My name is Karen. I'm 61 years old, and I've been married to my husband Michael for almost 4 decades. We've built a quiet life in a modest home tucked in the foothills of Northern California, with a back porch that overlooks oak trees and the distant shimmer of the river. Life isn't flashy anymore, nor do I need it to be. The routines are familiar, the days are predictable, and Michael and I have found peace in that kind of simplicity. When Michael told me he'd be flying to Ohio for a week to help his sister settle her affairs after her surgery, I didn't think twice. He's always been the kind of man to put family first, and I encouraged him to go. I would have gone too, but the idea of long flights and cold guest beds just didn't appeal to me anymore. My niece complained too much nowadays. A few days into his trip, Michael called me one evening. He asked if his old friend Jack could come by to pick up some of the fishing gear he'd left in our shed months ago. Apparently, the two of them had planned a trip to the lake once Michael got back, and Jack was eager to get things cleaned and ready. Jack and Michael had been friends since their army days, 40 years of inside jokes and stories I'd heard a dozen times over. Jack was a few years younger than us, maybe 58 or 59, with a rugged look about him that had softened over time. His hair had gone completely gray, but he still had that strong, alert posture that came from a lifetime of discipline and manual work. I hadn't seen him in a while, but I remembered him as charming in that slightly mischievous way. He always had something clever to say. So when he showed up at the front door the next afternoon, I welcomed him with a smile and invited him in for iced tea before he headed to the shed, still making the best lemonade tea west of Rockies, he teased as he stepped into the kitchen. Better, I replied. I've perfected it since your last visit. It was just meant to be small talk, friendly banter, nothing out of the ordinary. But as we sat down at the kitchen table, sunlight falling through the windows and catching the flecks of silver in his hair, something about the silence between us felt different. Jack looked at me in a way I hadn't felt seen in years, not since before the gray reading glasses and the softness that comes with time. It wasn't flirtatious, not outright, just attentive, like he noticed the details, the way I curled my fingers around my glass, the way I still tilted my head slightly when I listened. We talked about everything: our kids, his new job at the auto body shop, even the silly argument he had with his neighbor about tree trimming. I laughed more in that hour than I had in weeks, and when I stood to refill our drinks, I felt his gaze on me, not inappropriately, but with a warmth that made my skin buzz. You ever get lonely out here when Mike's away? He asked, his voice softer. Now the question lingered longer than I expected. I turned, giving a small shrug. Sometimes, but I like the quiet. He nodded, eyes thoughtful. I get that quiet can be nice, but sometimes it's also loud in the wrong ways, if that makes sense. I didn't respond right away, because it did make sense. I just wasn't ready to admit it. After he got his gear from the shed, he lingered at the door. I noticed it because I felt it, this hesitation, like he didn't want to leave just yet. You know, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, if you ever need help around the house while Mike's gone, even just someone to chat with, don't hesitate to call. There was a gentleness in his offer, and I didn't hear anything beneath it except genuine care. But even so, something stirred in me that night. After he left, I stood in the mirror brushing my hair, realizing it had been years since someone looked at me with anything other than casual familiarity. Michael loved me, sure, but we had settled into that rhythm of comfort, like two well-worn stones resting beside each other, smooth, but no longer striking sparks. That night, I thought about Jack more than I should have. The next day, I was out back, trimming the rose bushes, when Jack's truck pulled into the driveway again. He waved, stepped out, and walked over holding a small paper bag. You left this in the shed, he said with a grin. Turns out it was mine, but figured you deserved the prize. Inside was a jar of his home-made strawberry jam. He'd been canning it for years, something I always teased him about. I should have baked scones, I said playfully, Accepting the gift well, he said, that same mischievous glint in his eyes, "Maybe I'll stop by tomorrow, and you can," and just like that something new began to take shape, something I hadn't expected. Something subtle but unmistakably real, a ripple in the calm waters of my everyday life, a feeling I hadn't let myself feel in a long, long time. Not yet desire, not yet temptation, but something that made my heart stir in a way I'd almost forgotten it could. And so I said yes to the scones, to the visit, to whatever it was that had started between us softly, quietly, like a breeze through the open kitchen window. The next morning I woke earlier than usual. The sun had barely begun to stretch over the horizon, casting a soft orange hue across the kitchen counter. I stood by the window in my robe, watching the light slowly pour in, the warmth of it brushing against my skin like a gentle hand. I hadn't baked scones in years, but that morning I pulled out the flour, butter, sugar, and that old chipped mixing bowl I always used for special things. My fingers remembered the rhythm, cutting the butter into the flour, folding the dough just right, dusting the tops with a bit of raw sugar. I didn't rush. There was something therapeutic in it, something grounding. I told myself it was just a friendly visit, that Jack had always been this way, charming, easy to talk to, maybe a little flirty, in a harmless kind of way. But no matter how many times I repeated that thought in my head, my hands trembled slightly when I set the warm scones on the cooling rack. He showed up just past 10, right on time. I heard the gravel crunch beneath his boots before the knock came. I wiped my hands on a towel, checked myself in the hallway mirror, and opened the door. Jack stood there with that boyish smile, holding 2 paper coffee cups. "Figured I'd bring the drinks if you handled the food," he said, holding one out to me. I stepped aside to let him in. "Well, you're just in time, they're still warm." We sat at the kitchen table again, this time facing each other fully. No pretense of small talk needed. The scones disappeared quickly between us, and we drifted into that same easy rhythm of conversation, only this time it felt a little more personal. He asked about my art. I used to paint landscapes years ago, watercolors of the riverbend, the fields, the blue-gray fog that would settle after summer rains. I hadn't picked up a brush in nearly a decade, but I kept a few pieces framed in the hallway. "Why'd you stop?" he asked as I scanning the delicate strokes in one of the paintings across the room. I hesitated. "Life got in the way, work, raising kids, taking care of things." "You mean taking care of everyone else?" he said quietly, his gaze returning to me. There was no accusation in his voice, just understanding, and it hit deeper than I expected. I looked down at my coffee cup, tracing the rim with my finger. "I guess it's easy to forget who you are when you're always being something for someone else." He didn't respond right away, but the silence felt full, not empty. It held something unspoken, something that hummed just beneath the surface. Jack set his cup down and leaned back slightly. "I thought about you sometimes, Karen. Not in a weird way, just wondered how you were doing, if you were still painting. You were happy." That word sat heavy between us. Happy. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out at first, because what did happiness even look like at this point in life? Was it routine? Was it safety? Or was it something else, something I hadn't let myself explore in years? Instead of answering, I stood up and walked toward the hallway. I pulled out an old portfolio from the closet and carried it back to the table. "I haven't shown these to anyone in a long time," I said as I opened it, spreading out the pages. He looked through them carefully, reverently. "These are beautiful, Karen. You have a gift." His voice was low, sincere, not the kind of compliment meant to flatter, but the kind that sees something real and wants to honor it. "You ever think about starting again?" he asked. "I've thought about it," I admitted, "but I don't know if that part of me is still alive." Jack leaned forward, his eyes locking with mine. "She is." I can see her. For a long moment neither of us spoke. There was something in the air, charged but not dangerous, close but respectful. It was as if he'd reached into a part of me I had boarded up long ago and knocked gently, reminding me I was still there behind it all. Then he stood and gathered his coffee cup. "I should get going," he said, his voice softer now. "Didn't mean to overstay." "You didn't," I replied too quickly. I caught myself. and smiled. It was nice having someone to talk to. Jack nodded same here. As he reached the door, he paused and turned back. Would it be all right if I came by again sometime? I didn't need to think. Yes, I'd like that. He left, and I stood by the window watching his truck disappear down the long gravel path. My heart wasn't pounding. It wasn't some silly crush or fleeting moment of midlife excitement. It was something quieter, something that moved beneath the surface like the gentle pull of a current you don't notice until you're halfway across the river. That afternoon I unpacked my old easel from the garage. It was dusty, the wood warped just slightly from years of neglect, but it stood strong once I set it up in the sunroom. I found a small canvas, pulled out my brushes, and began to paint, not because of Jack, but because of what he reminded me I had buried. By evening, the house felt a little less quiet, a little less lonely. The air seemed lighter, as if it, too, had noticed the change inside me. And when I lay down to sleep, I found myself smiling, not from excitement or confusion, but from the strange comfort of being truly seen again. Days that followed unfolded like soft pages of a forgotten book, familiar, yet touched by something new. Jack didn't come by every day, but when he did it felt natural, like the kind of company that doesn't fill the silence but shares it. One afternoon I found myself in the sunroom again, brush in hand, painting the field behind our house as the light dipped into gold. I hadn't felt this connected to my own mind in years, not just to the act of painting, but to myself as a woman, as someone who once had dreams, quiet hopes, and a sense of wonder. The doorbell rang just as I was cleaning my brushes. Jack stood there with a half smile and a small bag in his hand. Brought you something, he said, holding it up. Inside was a tiny sketchbook bound in deep blue leather. Figured if you're painting again, maybe you'd want to sketch too. Sometimes it helps, just to keep things flowing. I didn't know what to say at first, not because I didn't appreciate the gesture, but because no one had given me something so thoughtful in a long time. Thank you, Jack, really. We sat out back that day under the wide maple tree near the fence line. He told me about his daughter, how she'd moved to Oregon with her husband and barely called anymore. I listened, truly listened, and when he laughed at himself for being a sentimental old fool, I gently touched his arm. You're not foolish for missing someone you love. That moment lingered longer than it should have. His hand turned slightly under mine, but he didn't move it. Our eyes met, and the quiet between us became heavy, as if the air itself were holding its breath. I pulled my hand back slowly, unsure, conflicted. I stood and walked to the edge of the yard, needing a second to steady the thoughts racing through me. Jack followed a moment later. Karen, he said, his voice measured, I don't want to make you uncomfortable. You didn't, I said, turning to face him. I'm not used to this. To someone seeing me, I exhaled, not as a wife or a mother, just as me. He looked at me for a long time. That's all I see, and I think you're extraordinary. My heart tugged painfully, both in longing and guilt. I loved Michael, that hadn't changed, but loved. Love isn't always the absence of something else. Sometimes it's a room with more than one light. Jack stepped closer, but he didn't touch me. He stood close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. Quiet gravity he carried. I'm not here to make things harder for you, he said, but I won't lie, I care about you. The honesty in his voice struck something deep. There was no pressure in it, no agenda. Just truth. I don't know what to do with that. I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to do anything. I'm here when you need me, as a friend, or whatever you need. Elect shortly after. Giving me space that night, I sat alone in the sunroom long after the light had faded, staring at my unfinished painting. My mind swirled with memories of Michael's steadiness, his kindness, his worn flannel shirts and quiet smiles, and Jack's laughter, his attention, the way he made me feel like someone rediscovered. Was it wrong to enjoy both? Was it betrayal simply to feel seen by another person? I didn't know. The next morning I received a text from Jack. Just a simple message, thinking of you today, hope you're painting I stared at the screen, a small smile creeping across my face despite myself later that day as I sat outside with a sketchbook in my lap. Michael called, his voice was upbeat, his sister was recovering well, and he planned to be home in 2 days. I should have felt excited, and part of me did, but another part, quiet and conflicted, felt something else, like the end of something that hadn't quite begun when I hung up. I closed my eyes and let the wind move through me, rustling the leaves, whispering things I wasn't ready to say aloud. By dusk, Jack's truck pulled into the drive again. This time I didn't wait. Inside, I met him halfway. "I've been thinking too," I said. He nodded gently. "I don't know what this is," I told him honestly, "but it means something to me. You mean something to me." Jack reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek in a gesture so tender it broke something open inside me. "I know," he said. "That's enough for now." He didn't kiss me. He didn't hold me. We simply stood in the fading light, letting the truth of it settle into our skin. It wasn't an affair. It wasn't even physical. But it was something far more complicated, an emotional crossing, a rediscovery, a kind of connection that didn't ask for permission, and it had changed me. Michael came home on a Thursday afternoon. I had baked a pie piece in his favorite and folded fresh towels in the guest room, even though he wouldn't need them. I didn't know why I was nervous. He was my husband, my partner for nearly 40 years. And yet, as I watched his car pull into the drive, my heart fluttered in a way that felt unfamiliar, not from anticipation, from uncertainty. He walked in with that same quiet smile, his suitcase in one hand, and his coat slung over the other. "You cut your hair," he said almost immediately, noticing the few inches I'd trimmed while he was gone. I did felt like a change. He kissed my cheek, warm, brief, familiar. The smell of his cologne filled the hallway, and for a moment everything felt normal again. But I wasn't the same woman he had left behind over dinner. He told stories about his sister's recovery, the cold weather in Ohio, how much he missed a real California tomato. I listened, laughed, filled his glass when it was low, but inside a part of me was somewhere else, lingering in the pauses, the moments he didn't notice, the small shifts in me. That night we lay in bed together. He fell asleep, quickly snoring softly like he always did. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, turning in slow circles, my hands folded over my stomach. I thought about Jack, not with longing but with clarity. What we shared hadn't been about romance. It had been about being seen, being acknowledged as a woman still full of feelings, still capable of desire and change and growth. He had sparked something I hadn't even known was dormant. But I also thought about Michael, about all the years we had stood side by side, through cancer scares, through our son's troubles with addiction, through financial droughts and emotional winters. He had been steady, safe, constant. He still was. The next morning, as we had coffee on the back porch, I told Michael I wanted to start painting again. He looked surprised, then smiled. "I always liked your paintings. You used to be so lost in them." "I wasn't lost," I said. "I was found." He nodded slowly, meaning settling in. He didn't press. He didn't ask why now. He just reached for my hand and held it gently. Later that afternoon, I wrote Jack a letter, not a text, not a call, a real letter. I thanked him for reminding me who I was, for showing me a version of myself I had nearly forgotten, for the attention, the respect, the emotional honesty. But I also told him I had chosen to stay present in the life I had built, not because it was easier, but because it mattered, because Michael deserved my full self, not the half of me that wandered into hidden corners. And I deserved honesty too. I never heard back from Jack, and I didn't expect to. That was part of what made it beautiful. It was a chapter, not a life, a brief moment where two souls recognized something kinder in each other. Weeks passed, then months. Michael and I found new ways to connect. I began painting every morning with coffee by my side. He started walking with me in the evenings, listening more closely, holding my hand a little longer. There were days I still thought of Jack, not with guilt or regret, but with gratitude. because sometimes it takes an unexpected presence to awaken what routine has quietly buried in the end. Nothing scandalous happened, no one was betrayed, but something inside me changed forever. I found the courage to reclaim parts of myself I thought were gone. I realized that it's never too late to rediscover your voice, your light, your sense of being fully alive. And as I stood in the sunroom, one golden morning brush in hand canvas, half filled with color and movement, I smiled to myself. I was no longer waiting to be seen. I had seen myself, and that was more than